Today I want to start in the whiteboard and then move to a demo. And the question is ML research versus production. And a lot of the questions we get from customers and prospective customers tend to focus or would be better informed. It would help them better to have a clear understanding of whether they're in the research domain or they're in the production domain of what they're working on. What do I mean by that? Well, for example, let's say you're saying, I'm starting out in a project. I want to use something really sexy with a bunch of GPU clusters and deep learning. That's awesome. And you'll need lots of data, lots of compute. All of that is still on the research side. Like, you're starting with a problem, you're gathering some data, you're doing some analysis, you're training some models, small, big, whatever. You're doing some model evaluation. And at the end, you should be, probably not, but you should be tying this back to a business metric, because nobody cares about your root mean squared error. They care about revenue up, cost down, risks mitigated. So you're doing all of this in the research phase. If you come and talk to somebody in the ML ops landscape, where we are with Continual and a lot of other tools, we're focused on the production side. These processes, independent of tools, are things like continuous integration, continuous deployment. So are we running automatic tests every time someone makes a change we're checking code into our Google Docs for code? Are we testing all of this every time we make a change? Are we actually doing deployments? Do we have a process for the deployment? So forget the technology and REST and microservices and stuff like that. Like, do we know who deployed, why they deployed, what did they look at? Did the model actually improve? Do we have a record of that? Do we have a paper trail? I mean, there's a CYA aspect to this, even for churn models at direct-to-consumer startups or recommendation engines, which are relatively low risk. Like, if someone doesn't click on the ad you serve them, it's not the end of the world. But still, we need all of this to actually build a good, high-quality ML system. And stuff like infrastructure as code, we're not guessing about our underlying compute spend. We're spinning up exactly what we need at scaling as we need, thanks to either our on-prem cloud or public cloud, and kind of on and on. And so I frame this here because we often get a lot of questions that are like, well, we're trying to solve for a production ML problem, but really they're still in the research phase, and they're saying, well, I want to be end-to-end. And it's like, there is an end-to-end, and that's the vendor's fault. Like, I brutalize that term, mercilessly and incorrectly. There is an end-to-end here that ends with like clear business value. We're in the laboratory, we're in the garage. If we do this thing with this, I have this kernel of an idea and I see this business value attached to it. I'm not missing that. In order to get there, I've got to grab some data, do some analysis, build some models, serve them, do some evaluation, and tie it back. Once done though, then it's like, okay, now, how do we make this a real software project? That means we got to think about automatic build and testing and deployments, handling the underlying infrastructure, so we don't have some physical server thing that's going to go down. How we're actually going to serve both the APIs, maybe the features themselves, how we're going to monitor all of this, how we're going to track it, and then how we're, maybe the kind of the most businessy thing will be your technical project management, how you're going to interface back to the company, sprint planning sessions, stuff like that. So independent of tools, these are the kind of processes you'll see on a research side and a production side. It's not to say that when we talk about production being this really hard last mile problem for ML, that research is easy, or that you're just going to willy-nilly spin up amazing models and build this great stuff without even trying. No, extremely, extremely hard. Just, this is hard too, and there's far fewer tools. So let's jump over to a demo now, if you're still with me, and we're going to go through some of the cool things for research, and then we'll start to map over the process. So I'm going to show AWS SageMaker, and then we can compare how we might do some of these processes. They have tooling for all of this stuff, and we can take a look at what it looks like. So now we're on the demo portion. We just talked about ML research versus development, research versus production, and we're thinking about this in terms of processes. Let's apply it to a tool. Let's make this a little bit more practical, at least as far as a tool is concerned. So I'm inside of SageMaker. SageMaker is one of the biggest, the best known. It has a ton of features, and admittedly, there's a lot of stuff here, so it can be a little confusing, but we'll pick Sagemaker Studio for just this quick exploration, because this is the first fully integrated development environment for machine learning. So it's an IDE, it's a development environment that has some software connotation or software development connotation to it. But really, let's think about this as your research and dev, your workbench, your lab, right? This is SageMaker Studio. So we've got stuff like connecting the data, AutoML, experiments, notebooks, models, deployments, this full end-to-end in the context of starting with an idea and building something out that in theory, at least, we're going to be getting some ML metrics back. We'll have to do the hard work of tying that to a business metric, of course, but this is what we would do in this tool. And then when we come over and we look at like the AWS well-architected framework for machine learning, which, by the way, if you're not reading these things, these are excellent documents on all of the different, AWS publishes white papers for all of the different architectures. For example, they have a deployment phase, and you can see that in the AWS is saying, if you're going to do our well-architected framework, like a good way to do this, a best practice, feature store, we've got some inferencing code, a model registry, here's our actual end application that may be consuming this, different types of deployments. This is getting very CI/CD, they have a CT pipeline. I mean, this is getting fairly complicated. It's beyond the scope of just Sagemaker Studio Lab. And that's not a knock on this tool. It's just to say that when we're in the research phase, we're doing a number of these end-to-end steps. We can do a lot of these things in a great tool like Sagemaker Studio Lab or within Sagemaker. When we start thinking about an actual production deployment, an actual production ML project, deployment will be one component of this, and AWS themselves said, look, there's a lot of stuff that goes into this, let alone we get into like the monitoring phase. There are a number of different components, tools, processes that go into this. This is really where your ML ops people, your vendors, folks like Continual, where we're really trying to help, because we're saying, look at all this work that remains ahead of you. You did all the gargantuan task of building something cool. Let us help you take this last mile. But by the way, what you thought was the last 10 yards to the goal line, to use an American football analogy, may actually be another 100 yards. It just doesn't involve the creativity and business acumen that you needed to build that initial model. The rest of this is kind of undifferentiated software engineering heavy lifting for the most part that we can really help with.